Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another episode of Microsoft Flight Simulator. Today we are going to be continuing the last portion of our Cessna Citation Longitude tutorial, in which case we will do the takeoff, climb through to our cruise altitude, and then descend and land in Minneapolis. So without further delay, let's get on with the rest of the video. Alright, so on the previous video we ended actually holding short of the runway, so I figured we would start just before then. If you have not seen part 1 of this tutorial series, there will be a link to it down in the description below. I highly recommend you watch that as we go through everything from the pre-flight to flight planning to startup, you name it, step by step by step. And this is all in relation to a PDF tutorial guide that I'm creating that should be at least ready to have version 1 released this weekend, just in time for Father's Day to enjoy some time with the kiddos, and then the evening hopefully flying a Cessna Citation Longitude. So let's go ahead and hold short here of the runway. Got foot on the brakes. We're going to go flaps 1 for takeoff. Arm the ground spoilers in case the event of a rejected takeoff. Speed bugs are already set. We have a rotation speed today of 122 knots. And let's do landing lights and the pulse light. And let's take our runway. We have a speed bug set at 185 knots, which is the maximum takeoff speed for this aircraft. Go ahead and take the runway, and then I'll walk you guys through what we're going to do first, and then we will talk about or we'll see it in action. Alright, so taking the runway here. Alright, so just a real quick rundown of how this is going to work. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to arm Toga. Toga can be found here on your throttle. And then we will spool the engines up to about 50% of N1, and then we will arm the auto throttle. Once you arm the auto throttle, you are hands off the throttle. It will automatically go to the speed setting, in which make sure your speed setting is still set to manual mode. Once we get airborne, we will change over to flight level change at about 400 feet AGL and immediately increase our takeoff speed to 250 knots, as we are restricted to 250 knots underneath 10,000 feet. Okay. As soon as we see positive rate, the gear will come up at approximately 185 knots or so, approaching 210 at the latest. We will have the flaps retracted and then continue our climb out. Okay, the profile is going to look like 185 knots to 250 knots. Once passing 250 knots, we'll accelerate 270 knots, and then once we reach Mach 0.78, we will switch over to the speed setting to Mach and increase to 0.80, and then once we get to our cruise altitude, we will speed up to 0.82. Now, the documentation that we can find and the sources that I have, the resources that mostly came from you guys, thank you very much. One gentleman in particular, you know who you are. Mach 0.84 is desirable, but I have found every time I've tried to achieve it, I end up overspeeding the aircraft, so I'm settling with Mach 0.82. Alright, so let's see all of this in action, and hopefully I don't mess anything up. So, again, first step, we're going to arm Toga. Okay, and that's a good indication that Toga has been set. We're going to spool the engines up to approximately 50% of N1. Let's keep going. There we go. And now we are going to arm the auto throttle. Auto throttle is engaged, so computer's in control of the throttles at this point. There's V1 rotating. Come on, baby. She can't be a little sluggish on the takeoff. Wheels up. Okay, and this is where it can be a little tricky. So we're going to try to pull up 10 degrees. So I'm trying to do this with both hands here. It's a little weird when you're trying to teach it. We're going to go flight level change, autopilot, and set our speed up to 250 knots. I should have had that mapped a little bit better. And flaps should be up by now. And we want our nav mode enabled as well. Now I'm not sure why it's trying to descend. Why are you trying to descend? What are you doing here, airplane? Because the autopilot did not engage. There it goes. Gosh darn it. Sorry, guys. Some tutorial, huh? So, anyway, let me walk you guys through that again, how that was supposed to go, because I do apologize, that was a mess. I thought I had clicked the autopilot, and apparently it did not register the mouse click. And I was seeing the white light here and wasn't paying attention. It gets a little nervous for the first time we're teaching these, so I apologize. So, let's run through that, how that was supposed to go again. We start rotating. First, we arm toga. We pull the throttles up to 50% of N1. At 50% N1, we engage the auto throttle. The aircraft should accelerate to the 185 knots we had in the box. Once we reach V1, we begin rotating, and then we climb slowly to 10 degrees. As soon as we begin climbing 10 degrees, once we can verify positive rate, gear up. Once gear comes up, we should immediately go to flight level change and autopilot and accelerate to 250 knots. Okay, once we get to about 185 knots, we should be going flaps up. Okay, once flaps come up, we should then be engaging nav mode anytime after 400 feet AGL and letting the autopilot take over to our cruise. Okay, at this point you can see we're climbing out at a very rapid rate, which is actually faster than what we have programmed, so I'm not quite sure why it's doing that. So that would actually get us in trouble right there. It's not honoring our speed. So let's try to pull the speed back a little bit because we want her to slow down, which she clearly has no intention of doing so. And I've noticed this more than once, but as we climb, obviously she slows down. Let's increase our altitude once we start passing through 10,000 feet. We'll set us up to 27,000, that works. We've passed 10,000 feet, landing lights off, taxi lights off. And at this point, we are now caught up. Once we reach our 250 knot mark, actually at this point we can go ahead and accelerate to 270 knots. Or you could do 290 knots if you wanted a speed climb. Did I bump it? I think I bumped it. There she goes. And at this point, we'll be watching our Mach, and once we get about Mach 0.78, we'll switch the speed by giving it a tap from knots to Mach. Now, normally, guys, I probably would have restarted that whole portion. But especially in tutorials, believe it or not, I like when I make mistakes. I like to leave them in there. I like it so you guys can see what's going on. You know, that way when you run into weird issues, you know things to look for. All right, we are approaching our 18,000 feet mark. So we'll go ahead and give the barometer a tap. Change that down to 2992 as the standard altimeter. At this point, we'll go ahead and increase our altitude up to our cruise altitude of 44,000 feet today. If you guys have any questions about the takeoff procedures, by all means, let me know. All of this information is in the guide. It is step by step by step, walking you through everything that you need to do in order to get the aircraft up to cruise altitude. Give you guys a quick screenshot. Here's so far what we're looking like. One of many pages to get you where you need to be. And you know what, let's go ahead and increase our speed. Let's do that speed climb. And this thing climbs like a bullet. It's a lot of fun. We can now disarm our ground spoilers. Honestly, this would have been a lot easier if I used my head tracker today. Unfortunately, I went to use it and the batteries were dead. And so I was a little bummed out. And unfortunately, I'm doing this at 9:45 at night. So missed that opportunity to get more. All right, so from this point, we'll be just continuing our cruise up to 44, our climb up to 44,000 feet. We're almost to Mach 0.78. So we'll just hang tight here for a couple of minutes. Once it reaches there, I'll be back with you guys and show you the next steps. All right, so we've just reached Mach 0.78, so we're just going to give this a tap. You can see our units up here have changed to Mach 0.78, so we're going to increase to Mach 0.80 for the climb. And then once we get to our cruise altitude, we'll accelerate to Mach 0.82. So I'll see you guys in just a couple minutes as we approach our cruise altitude. Alright guys, so we're just about at our cruise altitude. Less than 1,000 to go. At which point I'm going to go ahead and set our speed to Mach 0.82. Yeah, that might have been premature. Alright, well that's the first time I've actually tried doing that ahead of time, so I guess that's why you don't do it ahead of time. So we'll reduce the speed, let it finish the climb. So that is max level flight. I see how that works now. We're all learning something. And you'll see what I mean about how close it gets to the maximum speed here. We might be able to do Mach 0.83, we'll see. There we go, altitude's locked. Throttles are already starting to come back, you can hear the engines winding down. Speeding back up for cruise. Alright, from here I am going to go ahead and increase the speed. We're going to shoot from Mach 0.83 and see what happens. And there we are. cruise altitude. Now we're slowly going to keep accelerating. It takes a while to get back up there. I'll go ahead and give the altitude button a tap. That you should not have to do. I've been noticing that off and on with certain planes lately, that I've flown them and they just keep on climbing. Like I'll get up and walk away and I'll come back and it just kept on going. So it's just a habit I've gotten into with the simulator lately. And again, it's just the simulator. And I don't even know if it's really an issue anymore, but see what I mean? We're right on the edge. Yeah, we're going to be in overspeed. So let's just leave it at Mach 0.82. And that's what I put in the guide, and for that reason. I found that it gets into overspeed. So anyway, so that is it, guys. That's where we're at for now. So at this point, we're just going to hang out and cruise. We will be looking at our descent at approximately 130 nautical miles away. I'll be coming back to you, and we'll be walking through the descent procedures and getting the aircraft down into Minneapolis. So I will catch you guys in a couple hours. Alright guys, so I want to talk to you guys about a few options that we have as far as planning our descent. Now, I haven't found a very good descent calculator yet, but what I have found is a general rule of thumb for business jets, or turbojets as they are, because they fly so high and they fly so fast. We typically start descending anywhere from 100 to 120 nautical miles away, assuming we're above 35,000 feet. That's a general rule of thumb that I've been able to find, so that's what we're going to kind of go with today and see how it all turns out. So let me show you some easy ways to determine our distance here. We're going to come down to the FMS here. We're going to go to Flight Plan. We're going to go to Approach. We're selecting the KMASB. We're going to hit Waypoint Info. And here we can see our distance and we can see our elevation. These are important things to think about when we're going to our descent. Elevation gives us a general idea of what the target elevation is that we're going to be looking for. So for example, we'd be setting our descent altitude down to about 1,000 feet. Okay, we're going to be coming down again at about 120, 110 nautical miles. We'll be coming down. And the first thing that we're going to be doing is we're going to be slowing the aircraft down to Mach 0.80 for our descent. Now, interestingly enough, if you check out here, looking at the approach plate, okay, we can even see here turbojet aircraft descend via Mach number until intercepting 280 knots. Maintain 280 knots until slowed by the star or assigned by ATC. So you can see here we come down here to German, for example, it's the first one. You can see it's at flight level 220 or above at 280 knots, 280, 280, but then we start coming down here, start slowing us down. 250 here, 230 down here, depending on how you're directed in. Okay, so these are things to think about as you come into your approach, and this is information that is in the guide. So we are chewing up the distance pretty quick here, and that's because I have the time accelerated 4 times. So we're running a faster than normal sim rate here. Let's go ahead and pull this down to about 100 nautical miles so we can start to see what's going on. And so yeah, the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to be slowing the aircraft down. What was that about? That was weird. So we got a little bit to go here. And we're going to also want to make sure that we slow the aircraft down before we begin our descent. We want to reach Mach 0.80 and then we'll start our descent. And then we'll bring it down to 290 knots. And then come down to 280 knots and maintain 280 until we hit the correct altitude. Now, obviously at 10,000 feet, we need to be below 250 or at or below 250 knots. And again, you want to make sure that by the time you reach 10,000 feet, you are at 250 knots. So be sure to be slowing the aircraft down in time to be able to manage that speed accordingly. Okay, so we got Not too long to go here. Oh, we're just about there. So I'm going to set the sim rate back down to where it should be here. And I use a map or an app called Mobile Companion to control the sim rate. I highly recommend it. It's an extremely handy application. Alright, so we're at 121 miles away. Let's start slowing the aircraft down. So we're going to take her down to 0.80. Then we're going to start setting our altitude. Let's set our altitude. In this case, we're not worried about ATC today. We're just learning to fly the plane. So I'm going to bring her all the way down to about 1,000 feet. Now I may change that as I see our descent. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Set this down to 1,000 and let's do flight level change. Go ahead and set our range back out a bit so we can monitor things. And Mach 0.78 should be right about 290 knots. Go ahead and switch this back into knots. Actually, we're at 272 knots. So I'm going to go ahead and set it for 280 knots on the descent. It descends faster than it climbs. Again, this is according to real world information, guys, so if you're shocked, you're just as shocked as I am here. Now we need to check out what our approach speed is going to be looking like, so let's take a look at our fuel. Well, let's actually wait till we get down a little bit lower. Then we'll come back to that. So we're still going to be burning fuel here for a minute, so maybe a little too soon for that part. But we can set our nav radios, make sure they're set up correctly. So let's check nav 1. Because we are going to be using an ILS approach. So coming back to our chart, take a look at the approach plate, find 30 left, and let's find our frequency 110.3. So 1103 is what we want in the box, and we can just go ahead and hit transfer. So that's all set, ready to go. Back to the home page. I like to leave this up 85 miles away. Now 22,000 feet, remember what I said, you know, we're going to be slowing down real quick here, so I'm going to start setting it to 200 and start approaching 250 now. And then here's one of those moments where we're going to be taking a look back at the star. I want to make sure we're not descending too fast. We need to be above 17,000 feet at muscle. So, you know what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to increase our altitude. I'm just going to hold us here at 18. So we're going to lock it down here. So otherwise we're going to descend way too fast. Now this could be a way that the aircraft was just sort of behaving. I don't think it was supposed to descend at 6,000 feet per minute. That was kind of odd to me, especially given the fact that we were cruising in level flight at Mach 0.80, but it's hard to say. Looks like the flight level control does have a little bit of an issue there, maintaining the speed that we set. We're going to need to get our altimeter. We can see if we're not too far out. Minneapolis Center. Yeah. We'll just Google it for today. I just don't trust the in-game ATC. I always look it up. KMSP, MEDAR. Let's see what we're dealing with here. Looking at an altimeter of 3007 and winds 130 at 8 knots. Zoom this down again. Alright, so we can start setting that altitude back down again. And so now I'm going to set it at 12,000, which will be our next target. And let's begin. As we're coming down to 12,000, I'm going to slow us down to 260 knots. Alright, and I think we can go ahead and figure out our approach speed. So let's just going to take a look at the total aircraft weight right now. We're at 29,613 pounds. So if we go back to our approach chart, which will be included in the guide, we should be looking at about, let's see here, 29,000, 128 and 116 knots. So let's come down. Go to our home, go to speed bugs. We're going to set our approach speed. This one here should be at 128 knots. And our VREF will be looking at 116 knots. Okay, and those are all on. We'll go back to the home page. Oh, we need to set our altimeter. Got sidetracked with the altitude or speed refs. And I do apologize, guys, for some of that stuff. You know, I miss things here and there, or you know, I get sidetracked with stuff. These tutorials are fun to do. At the same token, you know, a lot of times I spend every second guessing myself. You know, wondering if I'm relaying things well to you guys. So do forgive me for that, please. I hope you're still getting the information you need out of these. It's very important to me that you do. Otherwise, it really defeats the purpose here. Alright, so we are on target here. So we're going to continue our altitude descent. We're going to take us down to 10,000. And again, engage flight level change. And this time, looking for 250 knots. At hasty, we'll engage the approach mode. As you can see, I'm tracking us here on Navigraph. We were right above 12,000. We're going to continue our descent, and we should be coming through in this direction here. We descended a little too fast, truth be told. We're about almost 1,000 feet under target, or over target. Under target. So I should have waited a few more minutes, so don't make that mistake. Make sure you wait till you hit your waypoint before you continue your descent. And at 10,000 feet, let's get the lights turned back on. Alright, so now we're approaching our next segment here. We're just going to pull us down here to Turtle here, and then we'll come up into Hasty. So from here, we are supposed to be at 7,000 feet, 210 knots. So, a couple things that we're going to do here. First off, we're going to reduce our speed, 210 knots. Now, anything below 250 knots, we need to be at flaps 1. So, let me get our speed set here. And let's set flaps 1. And then now we will also begin our descent to 7,000. And flight level change. Oops, see, I made another mistake. We were coming to Croix, or Croix, how you want to say it, so we need to be at 230 knots. Everything else stays the same. So, oops. That was just me just reading the chart incorrectly. As we're coming down to 7,000 feet, I'm going to start prepping a little bit more for landing. So I'm going to go ahead and arm the ground spoilers. And I was expecting us to fall below 230 knots, so anything below 230 knots, we need to be on flaps 2. At this point here, I'm going to go into our procedures, go to approach, and make sure that this activate is blacked out. As long as it's grayed out, it means the approach mode is active. We can start setting here. We're going to do bearing 1, set it to nav 1. Once we get a reading here for nav 1, that will, oh, there it is, IMSP. It means that the localizer has been established, or at least picked up, I should say. So once we come around onto Hasty, we'll be switching our nav mode over to from FMS to nav 1, so that way we acquire the localizer. I'm going to start making our descent down to 6,000 feet. And at this point, I'm going to use vertical speed and descend us at 1,000 feet per minute. That should be just about what we need to follow the 3-degree glide slope and keep us on track here. Now you can see, oh no, we're still following the same needle. Now I'm going to start reducing our speed down to 210 knots. And we're going to go to flaps 2. Alright, so at this point here, we're just about lined up. I'm going to switch our nav mode to nav 1 to acquire the localizer. Localizer is caught. You can see it down here as well. So here's the IMSP. That is our localizer, 111030, 18.8 nautical miles away. So this will line us up with the runway. Now I'm going to start reducing our speed even further down to 180 knots. That's just a little too soon. I'm going to go 190 knots. Actually, we can ride 180. So below 180 knots, we need to be at full flaps. So 180 knots is where you need to sit until you're ready to go. All right, and you can see we're actually above the glide slope at this point. So I'm going to go ahead and engage the approach mode. At which point the aircraft will now reacquire the glide slope. So we're going to descend pretty rapidly for a second. It's just long enough to catch the glide slope. We can set our altitude down to the required. We're going to set it to 2,000 for the go-around altitude. Just about caught it. We just want to make sure we catch it before 10 miles, ideally. The glide slope looks like it's locked up. We've got the glide slope. We got a 5-knot headwind, so we'll be on landing. We're doing VREF +3. So we come back to our speed bugs at about 50 or below 500 feet. We'll be looking for 119 knots. We're at 8 miles now, so we're going to go gear down and full flaps. And we're going to set our VAP here, so 126 knots. 128 knots, sorry. See, our radar altimeter is 2,100 feet. So at 500 feet, we'll take that down to the 119 knots. Give you guys a little camera candy there. Alright, so for anyone who might have skipped ahead, we're landing gear down, full flaps, fully configured, locked on the glide slope at our approach speed, 128 knots. At 500 feet AGL, we'll be switching over to our VREF plus wind component, which is, we're looking at 119 knots as we don't want to go above +3. So far we're nice and stable on the ILS approach. And in the interest of, because I can't move that fast, I'm going to go ahead and set our VREF now. So coming down to 119. And we'll be maintaining VREF until about 50 feet across the runway, in which case we will disengage the auto throttle and the autopilot. And actually at 500 feet we can disengage the autopilot, and that's fine. You can really disengage the autopilot whenever you want when it comes down to it. So autopilot disengaged. Auto throttle disengaged. 20 feet. 3-degree flare. Reversers out. Reverse is retracted. And welcome to Minneapolis in the Cessna Citation Longitude. We will exit the runway. Once we are completely clear of the runway, we'll stop the aircraft. We'll retract our flaps. Disarm. Oh, spoilers already disarmed. Good. Pulse lights off. Landing lights off. Whoa. And as soon as the scenery loads and stops being silly, we'll taxi to our gate. Alright. So at this point, let's find out where we're taxiing to. Like we're actually taxiing straight ahead. So landing went pretty well. The biggest thing is managing our speeds. Flight director's off, approach mode off. That part gets a little tedious and unnerving, but and again, I will be doing more tutorials with this, guys, that are much smoother. It's just one of those things that you know, as you're learning, not as I'm learning necessarily, but the first time I ever do a tutorial video, I'm always nervous. Go back and find my first A320 tutorial or the first TBM 930 tutorial, and it's just one of those like things that just grabs you. They just you always wonder, you know, about the criticism, what you're going to hear back, and you know, whether or not you're saying things well enough that people are going to understand it. And then the next thing you know, you're tripping over your words. And you know, I don't script anything. I don't type anything out. You know, everything I do, every video I do is just me talking. You know, it's me telling you guys what I know, what I see, what I experience. That's why I leave my mistakes in. You know, I can tell by watching a lot of people's videos that they take the things they do wrong out, because they'll say, all right, so we're doing XYZ, and then the video will clip over to the next segment, which is fine. And you'll notice that there's, you know, if you're watching, you'll see a complete configuration change of the aircraft, right? So let's see here. I'll make sure we're clear. Oh, I actually needed to taxi it that way, I think. Yeah, we don't want to back taxi. I see. I got to take the runway in order to do so. Alright, so crossing the runway. That A380. I think the A380 is such a cool airplane. Big son of a gun. I remember the first time I ever saw the A380 was I was waiting for my flight out of Phoenix to LA, and oh man, the first time I ever saw one in real life, those things are just, they're so big, man. They're so big. And then it was shortly after that I saw a 747 follow in behind it, and it was just like, you know, they're both incredibly large aircraft, and they both look so majestic in the air, but the A380 is just, man, that's a giant. All right, taxi over to our executive here. All right. Come on, sweet lady, keep turning. All right, so here we are. Let's set the parking brake. Oops. All right, and let's start the shutdown process. All right, so to begin our shutdown procedures, pretty simple here. We want to obviously make sure the throttles are at idle, de-icing switches are off. Emergency locator transmitter can now obviously be turned off as well. Go to the engine run switch here and set to stop. And of course, Microsoft has to do its thing. We also want to, at this point, flip on the APU. Monitor APU performance down here on the ECAS. Or you could use external power, whichever is your preference. APU is ready to go, so APU Gen on. Bus ties closed. Engine generators off. Main batteries, verify still connected and on. APU Gen, as we have set. Emergency light switch, can now come up top. Turn them to off. Turn our taxi light off. Recognition light, wing lights, anti-collision lights, and floodlights are off. And finally, shut the APU off if you're not doing a turnaround. And batteries 1, battery 2, and standby. Oh, an APU Gen. Sorry. All right, guys. Well, that is a complete flight. I hope you guys have enjoyed this one. I know it was kind of iffy at times. That takeoff was definitely very special, but definitely a lot of fun to learn it. The guide is much better and obviously much more detailed than my tutorial here, and you don't have to worry about me tripping over my words in the guide as I can see them and type them. So be on the lookout for that. That will be available to all Patreon subscribers of tier 2 and above, as well as all of my other guides by this weekend. I'm very excited to have it released. I know that there are many of you who have been waiting for that guide. If any of you are familiar with any of my other guides, I have an A320 guide using the Flybywire mod, TBM 930, and G3000 guide, as well as a G1000 guide. Consider subscribing to Patreon. Again, tier 2 or above, and you have access to all of my guides, and they are all full flight tutorials walking you through everything that you need, step by step, full pictures, flight plans included, you name it. All right, guys, until next time, stay safe, stay healthy. See you in the next one.